Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another exclusive Networks TGIF webinar. My name is Chris Panaris, and I'm the marketing manager here at Exclusive Networks. This is season 4, episode 3. We have our final episode of the season next Friday, the 13th, spooky. So please join us for that. And we also have an upcoming webinar dedicated to Fortinet's secure SD-WAN solution. That webinar will be happening on Friday, March 20th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So please register for that one as well. On today's webinar, we will be talking about how Fortinet can help you extend the reach of your security and protection beyond the corporate network, and as always, conclude with the live demo. I'm going to take a couple minutes here to discuss this slide, just for any first-timers joining us today, to let them know how Exclusive Networks can add value to your business. So here at Exclusive Networks, we are the value-added distributor for cyber and cloud security. We have over 62 offices worldwide and the capability to handle international deals and logistics worldwide as well. We offer pre-configuration and staging services. We are Fortinet's #1 global distributor. We offer rapid turnaround on quotes, direct access to account management, and support resources such as myself. And you always get to speak to a real person here at Exclusive Networks. A little more about what we offer. We offer technical, marketing, and sales support, assistance with building qualified leads and closing deals, certification training in group and individual sessions, a range of financing and leasing services to cover a variety of IT project requirements and technologies. And we have a growing list of vendor partners chosen specifically to integrate with each other that I'll touch on here at the end of this webinar. A little more about the support and services we offer. We offer pre and post sales support, security tools migration, security tools jumpstart services, staging services, vulnerability testing services, and cloud competency training. Our speaker today is Mr. Juan Quintero. He is our sales engineer here at Exclusive Networks, and he works out of our sales office in Miami. So now it's time to get down to business. Juan, it's all yours.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode. My name is Juan, and I'm going to be your host for today. Let's take a look at what we're going to talk about. So this episode is going to be a continuation of episode 1. Hopefully, all of you watched it. If not, it is now available in our YouTube channel, so you can go ahead and watch it. I'll be referencing some of that throughout today's content. But in episode 1, we talked about how to secure the branch and the different options that you can leverage from Fortinet in doing so. So today we're going to extend that protection just beyond the network of the branch itself. So what happens when your employees are traveling? What happens when they're working from home? So in those scenarios, the deployment that you did of the corporate network, if they're outside of that network, then all of that is useless. So you need to be able to have visibility and protection beyond the network. So we're going to discuss sandboxing, specifically cloud sandboxing from the FortiGate, and cloud sandboxing from endpoint protection from EMS. We're going to talk about VPN access, remote access, specifically SSL VPN access. And finally, we're going to talk about FortiClient EMS endpoint protection. So like I said, in episode 1, we talked about secure branch deployments. We talked about FortiGate by itself. We talked about FortiWi-Fi, which is the FortiGate with the integrated wireless access antennas. We talked about combining FortiGate with a FortiSwitch, with a FortiAP, how you're able to separate the different parts of the network through segmentation, how you're able to do device authentication, user groups also for authentication. So we basically showcased how through the Fortinet Security Fabric, you're able to create a bundle that offers really strong protection for any branch, whether it be a very small deployment to a medium or larger branch. So what happens when you have employees that are bringing their own device, which is very common nowadays, or that are traveling 20, 30, or even more a percentage of the time? So we have the secure branch, and then we have the wild, wild west out there. So what I'm referring to is, when you're traveling, you're working from a cafe, from a Starbucks, you're working from a hotel, you're using public Wi-Fi. From an administrative perspective, as an organization, you really have no control a lot of the times over that network, almost all the time. So what do you do? So we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do. So cloudy with a chance of malware. This is kind of a modification. You guys, some of you hopefully have kids and you've seen the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movie. So I kind of changed that. But these are some of the things that you can talk to your customers about. And number one, public Wi-Fi. So most hotels have public Wi-Fi. But I don't know if you guys are aware, a lot of hotels have a free Wi-Fi and a paid Wi-Fi. More importantly, and I've seen this a lot more now because I'm having to do a little bit more travel than in previous jobs, that they do not allow you to use VPN on the free Wi-Fi. So in order to use VPN, you have to go to the paid Wi-Fi. So then the employer, who is usually a lot of the times not a IT professional, what are they going to do, right? They more than likely are going to say, well, I'm just going to join the free Wi-Fi because I just need to send a couple emails, maybe log into the CRM and see what meetings I have or, what have you. So that's a problem. And we're going to take a look at how you can protect the endpoint with FortiClient to mitigate that problem. Another problem is smart homes. So you have Joe, he works from home and he likes his tech. So he has a plethora of smart devices and IoT devices, thermostat, vacuum, television, lights, and more importantly, he has a dumb router. Essentially, he has a device at the edge of his network that provides connectivity and convenience through wireless, but doesn't have any security features whatsoever. So that's a real problem. So we're also going to talk about how we can mitigate the risk there. Then we have smart users. And what I mean by that is BYOD is very popular nowadays, and I can definitely see the cost savings in that. But when users are using their own devices, they really control things like vulnerability management and updates. And I know personally, I am guilty of just snoozing those updates forever because every time I have to do updates, it seems like it takes 30 to 45 minutes. Who wants to lose 30 to 45 minutes of productivity? And nobody wakes up at 2 in the morning just to push the update button so it can be ready the next day when they're about to do some work, right? So that's also a problem. And then we have the opportunistic bad guys, right? The Robin Hoods of the future, if you will. Back in the day, I think everybody has seen the movie Robin Hood. Take from the rich and the oppressors and give to the poor. Now it's more about taking from those who the bad guy believes have too much and give it to themselves. So that's an issue. And because of automation and orchestration and machine learning that has been made so abundantly easier to access in the last few years, some of the end users that are going to come under attack now would probably not have been targets in the past, just simply because the effort to reward ratio was not right. But now bad guys can push a button and the machine does everything by itself. So the dynamic is changing and small businesses are becoming even more and more attractive. Okay, so secure access starts with VPN, which is step one. And the concept is very simple. You establish a tunnel between yourself and the internet that goes through the FortiGate that is at the corporate or at the secure branch office. And essentially what you're doing here, if you think of it like a highway, you know, you got all the cars in the highway, think if you could just make a tunnel and your car would just go through this tunnel. You know, nobody can even see you. You are protected from the drunk drivers, the bad drivers, even traffic. It's the tunnel, it's just for you. So with FortiGate, you can set up SSL, both tunnel and portal, and accomplish secure access to the internet by having all that traffic being filtered by the FortiGate at the corporate network. And to take it a step further, you can enable two-factor authentication with FortiToken, and all that can be done from the FortiGate. So SSL VPN how-to. We're gonna take a look at this in the demo, but essentially, these are the different steps that you're gonna need to set up. First, you need users, and you need to put those users in groups because it's easier to apply policies to groups than it is to apply them to individual users. Then you need to actually set up the settings and the connection settings. So what interface you're gonna listen on, what port. Also, you can make it so that people connecting to SSL, they get specific IPs, so you can just take the default subnet that the FortiGate provides. We'll see that later. You can also restrict access to specific hosts. So this is another way that you can control who connects to the VPN. Down here, we have the setup of the access of the different groups. So you can give a group full access, meaning that they can log into both the portal and tunnel. You can give other groups just web access. You can give a third group, for example, only tunnel access. And then all other groups or anybody else would have no access. And then finally, you need to create a policy where you essentially are saying, okay, now that these people are connected the right way, using the right credentials, I'm going to allow them access to XYZ assets inside the organization. And you know, we'll see that a little bit later in the demo. And this is a view of the VPN portals. So under the same VPN section, there is a SSL VPN portals. And essentially you click on each of these and you tailor it the way that you want. So as you can see, full access has both tunnel and web enable. No access has nothing. Tunnel access has tunnel access. And web access has only web access. There are other use cases also for web access SSL VPN. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. So shared drive. Shared drives is a big problem because essentially that is like a it's a drive that exists on all the computers. So if the shared drive is compromised on any computer, the infection can spread to all your systems. So then that's when you call some of the mom and pop shops trying to place an order and they say, oh, we can't do it right now because our systems are down. And I mean, I don't really want to repeat too much what you guys already know because we all read the same tech publications. But in small business, there is a greater chance that you won't recover from a major data breach or a major attack. They just usually don't have the liquid resources to recover from something like that. And when you lose face with your customers, essentially the customer's not going to wait. They're not going to wait to call you back later when the systems are back. They're going to call the next guy who offers the same thing. And if you can't come back to business in a fair amount of time, then you could lose your business. So one use case for web portal VPN is that you can create, say you have a NAS. So which is kind of like the same thing that's happening here on the left. Instead of having a shared drive, what you do is you set up web portal VPN, and then the users would VPN in, and then within that web portal, you put a link to the IP of the NAS. So they're accessing the NAS through the to their browser. So it would be very similar to how you would access something like OneDrive.com. And then once in there, they can still upload and download information. And all of that is being filtered by the FortiGate. So beyond that, beyond VPN, the next step is to protect the endpoint with FortiClient. And I kind of want to talk about how to get to this step from a business perspective. I have a lot of our partners that they want to set up VPN, but they want to set up native client VPN, which is fine. But from a selling perspective, if you can talk to your client into SSL VPN with FortiClient, then that is an opportunity for you to upsell to say, okay, you already have FortiClient installed. Let's enable some additional features to protect those users when they're outside of the corporate network. So malware protection, application firewall, send telemetry to the FortiGate. That will be more from when they are actually in the network, but it's a feature that is also added with the FortiClient protection. Vulnerability scanning, device control, so prevent people from plugging in random USBs into your computers. Software inventory, and we're going to look at all those features and the configuration of those features in FortiClient later on. Okay, so I do want to take this few minutes and talk about the FortiClient differences, because this is still a very predominant topic that I have to find myself answering at least on a weekly basis. So right now there is two versions of FortiClient. There is 6.0 and 6.2. There is really no wrong answer. And what I mean by that is that if you're looking at an environment where the FortiGates are 6.0, then obviously you're going to need a 6.0 FortiClient. In 6.0 and below, and what I mean below is like 6.0, 5.xxx all the way down, the FortiClient is controlled by the FortiGate. So essentially from the FortiGate dashboard, you have an X amount of allotted FortiClients, and then you just click on a button and you can download the client, and it's all controlled through there. There are two licenses. There is a telemetry and there is a compliance license, and they are sold in packages of 100. So think about that, because while there is no wrong answer, right? Usually, or these customers should want to at some point upgrade to 6.2. And when you upgrade to 6.2, you're going to lose that ability to control the FortiClient from the FortiGate. Not to mention that in a small branch environment, and this is something that Fortinet realized, so therefore in 6.2 and above, first of all, you only have one license. So where before you had management and telemetry, so if you wanted to, say you had an office with 40 endpoints, first of all, you needed 100, and then you need 100 of each one. Whereas now you have one license. The only difference is the Sandbox, so you can get with or without Sandbox, and we'll discuss both of the scenarios, right, for that. But also the packages are 25. So if you have an office of 40, you just need to get 50 to cover the office. And then you can tell your client that he has an extra 10 for future growth, which is a lot easier to swallow than having to buy 100 when you only have 40. There is another major difference. Obviously, you need FortiClient EMS to manage the FortiClients. Here are the system requirements, because a FortiClient EMS is just an image that can be downloaded on any system that meets this minimum requirements. You can put it on a VMware VM or any other hypervisor that you have in private cloud. You can also put it in public cloud, so Azure, AWS, GCP, etc. I kind of want you guys to pay special attention to this down here. So internet access is required during installation. and then it becomes optional once installation is complete. FortiClient EMS accesses the internet to obtain information about FortiGuard engine and signature updates. So a few bundle recommendations. When working from home, occasionally accessing data from outside the organization, VPN access is a must if you can to access that corporate data. Endpoint protection is highly encouraged. That kind of would depend on if you have the ability to control and manage that device or not, right? If it's a device that you don't control, then maybe you don't have the ability to make people install FortiClient, but you definitely can encourage it. Sandbox Cloud is optional, already included in your FortiGate bundle. So what I mean by that is that UTM and enterprise bundles of FortiGates include Sandbox Cloud, which means that you can send application information to the cloud and then it gets executed on a sandbox environment. If people are using VPN to tunnel in to access corporate resources, when that traffic is going through, is being filtered, Sandbox Cloud is being leveraged in that environment. So that's why I said that Sandbox Cloud, from the perspective of FortiClient, is optional because you already have it on your UTM or enterprise bundles. So from working from abroad, or if you're a frequent flyer, then VPN is still a must, and endpoint protection is a must. You must have endpoint protection if you're doing the majority of your work outside of the controlled corporate network. And in that scenario, then Sandbox Cloud from the FortiClient is also highly encouraged, because a lot of the traffic is not gonna go or may not go through VPN. So you need a way to protect the endpoint by itself when it's accessing the internet directly. And you need a way to send applications to a sandbox environment where they can be executed. And then you can know if there is something fishy going on in there. All right, so I got one slide before the demo, and that is Fortinet SD-WAN. Like I said in episode 1, I am required to talk about SD-WAN on every single episode that we do from now until the end of time. So here's to you, Fortinet SD-WAN. So seriously though, I do get asked, what is Fortinet's play in SD-WAN? It's very simple. Consolidate technologies. Go from the scenarios here on the left, where you had a dedicated SD-WAN appliance and different levels of protection on different ISPs, or where you're exposing your SD-WAN appliance because you have the protection behind it, to just having it all in one box. So when you're doing your quality of service and when you're doing your security, you're controlling everything from one interface through one technology vendor. We are, and I think Chris did mention this, we're having an SD-WAN webinar in a couple of weeks. And essentially what I'm going to do is I will have a few slides, talk about the business advantages of SD-WAN and some of the use cases. And then we're gonna take a 100F with the configuration out of the box, and we're gonna configure SD-WAN from scratch. And you guys are gonna see that it's very simple. Okay, so now I'm gonna stop sharing to change screens, and then we're gonna get to the demo. Okay, this is still going good. Okay, so the first thing I wanna talk about is I wanna talk about sandboxing. I wanna talk about how you set up the sandboxing within the FortiGate, and then where you can actually see the information. So setting up the sandboxing is a two-step process. First, you're gonna go to the Fabric settings here. And then here is where you set up all your Fabric integrations with your different Fabric devices. We're not gonna really look at all of that today. We're gonna concentrate on this right here. So you need to toggle this on and then select Sandbox Cloud, which is included in your UTM and enterprise bundles. You're gonna get a little warning when you first do it, or you may, depending on whether you have already configured policies or not. saying that there are no policies that are using antivirus. So you need to fix that in order to actually leverage the FortiSandbox cloud. So then step number 2, you come over here to your security profiles, antivirus. You're gonna click on the one that you're using. And then down here, you're gonna send files to FortiSandbox appliance for inspection. And you have 3 choices. Honestly, usually I just recommend to send all supported files. And then how you can see that information is by logging into your FortiCloud, which is your also included remote management, cloud management, so you can manage your FortiGate bundles from anywhere. So in here, there is a Sandbox tab, and then here you can see all the Sandbox metrics. So status, results in the past 7 days, top 5 targeted hosts in the last 24 hours, and then these, I think, is a breakdown of the different application types. Keep in mind, if you have the free version of FortiCloud, you're only going to get 7 days worth of data. So there is an additional license that you can buy that gives you a little bit more. So back to FortiGate, next thing I want to talk about is VPN, and specifically SSL VPN. So under the VPN, right, you're going to come over here to your SSL VPN settings. And there was a slide where we saw parts of this, right? So these are the settings. You're going to configure your interface. This port is for web. Also, you need to know this so that when you set up the web portal, you're going to need the port as well. Here's the restrict access. So any host, or you can limit access to specific hosts. This is where you can customize what IP addresses those devices are gonna get. There is a default, or you can specify whatever you want. And down here, which I believe is the most important part, is where you actually give specific access to specific groups. And if you kind of highlight these groups, you're gonna see the members, right? And then you're gonna see what kind of access they have, right? So how do we configure those users? So here, under all your users, this is where you're gonna make those users that you are then going to put into these groups down here, right? And then that's what you're gonna leverage for the settings of the user authentication for VPN access. And then I also wanna show you the portals. So this is the other slide that I had. So this is where you configure what kind of access the users are gonna have. So you have tunnel access. You can also limit user to 1 connection at a time. You can do split tunneling. So essentially, they're only going to use the tunnel when they're actually accessing information that is behind the corporate network. So this is something that you can do if you're concerned about those VPN users choking up the network. These are the personal bookmarks. So here you can see if the users has made any bookmarks for themselves, and that's something that you're gonna use when you are accessing portal, the VPN through portal. So this is what I was talking about. So this is not only great for remote access, but you can also do this for in-office access. So essentially, it's just like OneDrive, right? When you're using OneDrive, you go to OneDrive.com, and then you see all your files. You download, you preview, you view, you download, you upload. In this scenario, this is not really a NAS. These are just links to other IPs in the network. So everything that's being done in here is being inspected by the FortiGate. So VPN particularly SSL VPN, is very easy to configure on the FortiGate. I'm not really going to talk about IPsec. I use a lot of IPsec in tunneling. There is actually a wizard. You could just follow the steps and end up with a fully configured IPsec tunnel, which is another great feature that Fortinet has to help you guys, up and running quickly. But for remote access, I personally prefer SSL VPN, and from a business perspective, it gives you that opportunity to upsell, because you start with the FortiClient for VPN, and then they get used to having that on the endpoints, and then you can have that conversation about, hey, let's enhance the security, let's add some features to that FortiClient, let's just get 25 licenses, let's test it out, let's see if you like it, Mr. Customer. Okay, so we talked about sandboxing, we talked about VPN. So the last thing I want to talk about is FortiClient endpoint protection. Okay, so as you guys can see, it has a very familiar look. You have menus on the left, and then you have widgets on the right. So let's go through some of these. You have a dashboard, just like you have a dashboard on pretty much every other Fortinet appliance. And here you have your system information, your license information. As you can see, I don't have the Sandbox cloud license in this particular environment, because in my use case, all the devices that I am using for testing are always inside the corporate network. And I already have cloud sandboxing on my FortiGate. So all that traffic that's passing through, and again, and if you haven't watched episode 1, go ahead and watch it, because we have FortiGate, FortiSwitch, FortiAP, that entire bundle becomes essentially one appliance. And all that traffic, even when it's going between FortiSwitch ports or from FortiAP to FortiSwitch, is being inspected, and FortiSandbox Cloud is being leveraged. So in my particular use case, it didn't make sense to also get FortiSandbox Cloud here. Endpoint connections, management, activity, alerts, operating system breakdown, FortiClient versions, and then web filtering detections. So these are, if FortiClient detected something that is worth looking at, you're gonna get the endpoint in here. Also, we have a vulnerability scan, and it breaks it down into low, medium, high, critical, and then you can kind of have some other sub options here. Endpoint status. Then we're gonna see all the endpoints. And this is one of the things I kind of want to show you. Obviously, in a larger deployment, you're probably going to be integrated with AD, so you can pull your groups from there. But if you can't, because there is no AD, it's a smaller deployment, which, in branch, in small businesses and branch offices, that's going to happen. You just create groups. And then these groups can be whatever you want. I have it kind of broken down into OS and then server or workstation. And then you can assign policies to these groups. So when you drop an asset into one of these buckets, it automatically configures FortiClient with the policies that you created. And we're gonna see how you would do that. But for example, if I click on the server group, I have 4. And if I click on the workstation, I have 1. There's also another thing that I wanna show you here, which is this. This means that these endpoints are sending telemetry to this FortiGate, which obviously you should recognize that serial number in your environment. And this is the policy that is being applied to them at this time. You can also click on them and you get a bunch of other information, details about it, connection, status of the different protection components, which ones are enabled and not enabled. You can also scan, patch, move to other groups, or take a number of different actions from here. Okay, so let's move on to software inventory. So software inventory to me is very important. Not to say that Fortinet is the only one doing this. There are others that they offer it, but it's very important, especially if you are managing a workforce that is distributed and that is working from home. You need to address the use case of shadow IT. You need to know, if you can, what people are installing. So if you have assumed that level of risk where you're allowing your employees to install applications on the machines, then it would be a good idea to have visibility on what they're installing, right? So you can do that from an application perspective or from a host perspective. So you can target a host specifically with this view or with the application view. If you have an application, or if you know that there's an application that is vulnerable, you want to know if, first of all, if it's installed in any of your endpoints, and then you can go and see what endpoint is installed on. So then next we're going to look at profiles and policies. And this is where FortiClient EMS is very similar to FortiGate. In FortiGate, you have security profiles like your antivirus and IPS and all that. And then you take those security profiles after they've been configured and you apply them to policies. And then you take those policies and you protect the traffic that's going through the different interfaces. Well, this is a similar take. You have these profiles that we're going to see. Then you take those profiles and you assign them to policies. And then those policies are the ones that are protecting your different groups of endpoints that you have. So let's go ahead and see that. So here we have, I just have three. There's a default, low security, and max security. So let's take a look at this one. So essentially here is where you configure all the things that you want to enable or disable. So malware protection, and down here, okay, device control, removable media access. So this is something that you would consider turning on to keep people from plugging in USB thumb drives when they're traveling around, because God knows what's on those things. Sandboxing, as you can see, mine is always going to be grayed out because I just don't have that license. Then we have web filtering, and a lot of these, they work very similar to how they work on a FortiGate. You know, web filtering is web filtering. You see you have the site categories here. So a lot of this should look very familiar with you guys. And then you have exclusions down here, firewall, and then you have the different categories that you can allow, monitor, or block. VPN, so here you can actually pre-configure SSL VPN connections with all the settings, so your users don't have to do anything but just click on it when they need to connect. Vulnerability scanning, and then you can set up automatic patching levels. So here this essentially means that it will automatically try to patch critical level vulnerabilities on all the assets. And then here you have your system settings. And what I kind of want to point out here is, if I can find it, there we go. Upload logs to FortiAnalyzer, FortiManager. So if you guys are offering services, we talked about this in some of the previous episodes, and you're leveraging FortiAnalyzer to manage all your FortiGate bundles out there, and you're trying to get that single pane of glass, right? It takes time to log into different platforms. So what you can do is you can send all the FortiClient EMS logs to FortiAnalyzer, and in FortiAnalyzer, you can have an administrative domain for FortiClient. So when you change to that administrative domain in FortiAnalyzer, all you see is essentially what you would see here, FortiClient data. Application inventory, vulnerabilities, vulnerable assets, detections, that kind of thing. So now you don't have to log into FortiClient endpoint management. You're getting it all from that single pane of glass that is FortiAnalyzer. So these are your profiles. And then let's go into policies. Okay. So these, let me click on one. This is a policy. This policy is called Max, and it's assigned to the workstation group. We saw the groups earlier. And essentially, it says that the default profile is low security, but when the device is off net, we're going to enforce max security. And we saw the profiles before. So in the profiles, we configure what features we wanted, how we wanted to be a little bit more lenient or really lock down the device. So then here we're saying how we're going to assign those profiles to the policies and how we're going to apply those policies to a set of endpoints. So that's what we're doing here. And finally, there is one thing here called the telemetry gateway list. And this is essentially all the FortiGates that are in the network. I'll explain in a minute what this is. Okay, so in the past, and when I mean in the past, I'm talking 6.0 or below, because FortiClient was essentially managed from the FortiGate, when you downloaded FortiClient, it knew where to send the telemetry to already. Now, FortiClient is managed by FortiClient endpoint management server. So it is fully independent. You can deploy this in an environment where there is no Fortinet, and it will act as endpoint protection on its own. But if you want, if you have Fortinet, FortiGates in that environment, and you want to send telemetry to the FortiGate, then you can have a list of gateways, and those gateways are essentially just the IP of the FortiGate. And what you do is you figure out for each group what is the closest FortiGate, and then you enter that here. And then when they are on net, meaning when they're in the network, because again, some of these people might travel, they might not be in the office all the time, they might work from home. So when they are on net, they are going to send telemetry to that FortiGate. So in the FortiGate, you will be able to see user information, not just IPs, which is very important if you have assets that are being accessed by multiple users and you're trying to determine when something happens, who is responsible, because then we need to take a look at the device to see if it's infected. We need to coach that person to make sure it doesn't happen again. So having user information and not just IP and source and destination is very useful when you're trying to pin that down. Also, let's take a look at the appliance administration. There is another thing that, installers. Deployment packages. So this is a very easy way that you can get your users to install FortiClient remotely. Once you have, so you walked into a project, there was 100 users, you pushed it out, but then that organization might add employees, one at a time. So with this, you can configure, and let me just click on add. These are all the steps. So you essentially just go through the steps here. You give it a name, features that you want enabled out of the box. And then these are some of the added things that you can enable, like a desktop shortcut, installer ID, enable endpoint profile, and then you assign the one that you want. And then finally, enable telemetry. And then you will have a link, and you send that link to that new employee. They click on it, and here is the FortiClient EMS executable or MSI, what have you. And then just download it, install it. And because you assigned a profile, all those features will be automatically enabled. It will know who to send telemetry to. So all the settings are already pre-configured. You don't need to configure anything. So it'll behave in the way that you told it to behave when you were setting that deployment package. Lastly, just a quick look at the settings. So this is where you configure the IP that FortiClient is going to listen on. This is the port that FortiClient listens on. This is the configuration for that installer link, if you can see, is the IP 10443, and then installers, and then depending on which one, I have one that's for workstation, another one that's for server. And then let me go back to the FortiGate. So when I am talking about telemetry, let me see, I don't know how much activity. Okay, we had some activity. So here is the difference between the devices that don't have FortiClient installed, such as my laptop, and a device that does. You can not only see the IP, but you can also see the user. And by the way, here in FortiView, when you click on these, you're gonna get a lot of information. Okay, so that is all we have for the demo today. So I am going to go back to the slides real quick. Just bear with me. And of course, all the Fortinet resources that were used for the making of this webinar. All of our vendor partners. So beyond Fortinet, we distribute other cybersecurity, cloud security technologies. If you have any questions about any of these, please get with any of us and we'll be happy to answer those. And I am actually going to let Chris talk about the next slide.
Yeah, so I just want to take a couple seconds here to remind everyone of the So You Think You Know Fortinet quizzes that are being hosted in March this month. Our top 4 winners for each quiz will receive a $100 Amazon gift card. And the first quiz is already live. So if you haven't taken it yet, head on over to our LinkedIn or Twitter page and you can find the link and take the quiz. And hopefully you win that $100. The next quiz that we're having will be live on Monday, March 16th. So be on the lookout for that. And you can follow us on our LinkedIn and Twitter pages to make sure you see that as soon as it pops up. As I mentioned in the beginning of our webinar today, our final episode of the season is next Friday, the 13th. And we also have the SD-WAN webinar we mentioned on Friday, March 20th, where we will show you how to unlock the power of Fortinet's secure SD-WAN. And otherwise, that's all we have for you today. So thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next week and we'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great weekend.